Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, you all know, and logos in Latin means a study or a science. So Sattology means a study or of science, study of truth or science of truth. It's an antonym of mythology, which means a study of fake, imaginary, or a lie. Myth in Sanskrit means any of these three things. Many words are made out of myth, Sanskrit dhatu. So in this show, we try to bring out the best we can. And today I have a very eminent guest. He has come on a show many, many times before. At least twice he has come. And he runs a very popular forum in India. And when I tell you the forum name, you will guess it, who I'm talking about. And so he's the founder of Jaipur Dialogues, a very eminent writer. He's written 3 books on Krishna trilogy. And also he's doing a yeoman service in India in trying to bring out current topics in a very unique way. Probably is one of the channels that I also watch because very good discussions are there. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Sanjay Dixit. Namaskar, Sanjay ji.
Namaste, Namaste, Aditya ji, and everyone who's joined. Very excited to be here once again. I think we were here earlier, almost 7-8 months back, a couple of times.
Correct.
Since then, it's been a very long gap. Very happy to be here once again.
So Sanjay ji, like you are, you can say self-motivated. You have been a civil servant. You have seen from inside out how the India functions. You know that, and I also came to know from one of your shows that you were a sailor, also.
Oh yes, I was. I sailed for 4 years.
Yes, you're a sailor too. So so the art of balancing. Did you learn from sailing or from the profession and the experience you had?
Oh, well, I learned the art of facing hazards during sailing because we also faced a lot of storms. In fact, one of them was what is called a level 10 storm. So that's where I think, we learn to be composed even in the face of the greatest adversity. And then, of course, civil service in India in itself is a big hazard. So, so having sailed earlier, one also learned to sail through the civil service.
Yeah. So, in most of your writings and things, I've seen you as a very uh, observant of the Hindu culture and philosophy. So, what do you say about the global state today or affairs of the Hindu culture today? What is the global challenges before the Hindu society today?
I don't know how many people who are here have watched uh, our earlier conversation on Sattology, because I think one of them was titled All Religions Are Not the Same. And that, I think, people could go back and watch that and then understand the different frameworks in which the Sanatan Dharma and the other religions operate. And one of the problems that the Hindu identity faces today is that very often they try to interpret Sanatan Dharma from the same framework in which the other religions operate. Let me make it simple for everyone. And that simple thing is that the Abrahamic religion framework is basically an intellectual framework. And if we actually look at the writings of the church or the evolution of the early church, they completely discouraged any direct experience of the divine. And because they were the agency, and they did not want anyone to go directly to the divine, they had to go through the medium of the church and through the medium of Jesus. And therefore, they made it into some kind of an intellectual endeavor and confined it to what is called a book. That book, of course, is much more diverse than the book in Islam, which is actually very limited. It's just three books. Over here, of course, you have, I think, other Orthodox have a certain number of books, and Catholics have certain number of books, 50 or something. I don't remember the exact number. So uh, you confine to one book and what is called one prophet and one God. That is the limitation, and then you have to explore that intellectually. That is the issue, and that is the limitation here. Sanatan Dharma is basically the framework is experiential, and because the framework is experiential, everything changes. Because when you make it experiential, then the epistemology, or what you say, the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in eating it. So the proof doesn't belong to the book alone, which is the case in the Abrahamic religions, that all the proof, everything has to come in those religions from the book alone. In Sanatan Dharma, because of the experiential framework, you actually add one more level to your what is called the psychic experience. And because of that, it becomes much more vast. The evidence is actually, all the stress is on direct evidence in the sense that you experience the divine directly, and you experience the divine within you. That is the easiest, because that is also the closest. So accordingly, because of the framework, then everything changes. The time concept changes, the logic concept changes, the epistemology or the proof concept changes, then uh, attitude towards science changes, in the sense that unlike other religions where whatever is written in the book has to be taken as it is, here you have the scientific methodologies of questioning available to you, even scientific tools of falsifying the doctrine, or rebutting the doctrine, refuting the doctrine, changing the doctrine. All those are available. And accordingly, of course, the cosmology changes. The cosmology becomes the multiverse cosmology is not a problem because of this framework in the Sanatana Dharma. Uh, the cosmology, of course, in both in the Bible and the Quran, and as well as, of course, Torah is part of the new Bible. There, it is extremely limited. So that's why they still talk about the flat Earth and things. That's because of the limited intellectual framework. And of course, the eschatology, that is the theory of death, also changes. In the intellectual framework, it is finite, and in the experiential framework, it becomes infinite. And of course, the divine, the experience of the divine, the immanence of divine is fully permitted in the experiential framework, because that is the closest, as I said earlier, that is the closest you can experience the divine. And the intellectual framework strictly defines what is called the separation of the divine and the separation of the human beings. These are the major differences, and that is because essentially the framework, and that is why I say that when there is a crisis of identity among the Sanatanis, so that happens also because they try to uh, define, or they try to view the Sanatan Dharma in the same intellectual framework that they become used to, especially if they are in the Western countries. That I think is a general statement that I can make in the beginning.
Sanjay ji, you touched so many important points. You touched on different aspects you touched. And one of the best things I like, which I use so many times, whether it's a coincidental, I always say it's an experiential science where when you experience it, and then you can actually feel it. So what is written, you can verify it yourself. So, generally when I used to go out to distribute Bhagavad Gita in many places in the US, so they used to ask me what's the difference. I used to say, your book tells you what to do. This book lets you find out yourself. So, uh,
Exactly.
it's a very good way to put it out there. And I think you've done so much research on comparative faiths, and which is a big issue in the US. I think most of the Indians are not aware that faith is a big issue in everything in the US, even though US is known to be a democracy which is pretty much independent of faith, but the faith plays a major role in in elections also here in a big way. And in every single sphere also plays, probably in the private corporations it doesn't play a big role, but mostly in the government and other areas it plays a big role. So my another point to you, last show, I'm going to put a link out for the last show what Dr. Sanjay Dixit ji was referring to. So you can view that show also, last one, that all religions are not the same. Now my next point is for you is, like you said about the difference in Sanatani perceptions or unity for the Sanatani people, why the differences are there. So do you think that they made up, because when I went to Vatican I thought they're trying to make their history, like they're trying to write their history, wherein our traditions, great sages have already documented, is one of the most documented cultures of the planet today. So do you think that is going on right now with their cultures in the
Yeah,
Abrahamic
if in
faith?
the with the Western cultures,
Yes.
well, uh, I was most amused when I learned that one of the most, I should say, what should I say? Should I call it grotesque, or should I just call it interesting event of the last 500 years uh, was the oppression of Galileo by the church. And you know why? Because he said that the earth goes around the sun, something that is actually written in Rigved. Okay, that that the earth is round and it goes around the sun is something that is written actually in Rigved. And in they persecuted Galileo, but when science proved through direct evidence is actually not permitted in the Abrahamic religions. The Western religions do not admit of direct evidence; they only admit of the evidence that is written in the book, the evidence of the word. So it is called Shabda Pramana in the Sanatan Dharma. Actually, all dharmas, for that matter, all dharmic traditions, the Pratyaksha Pramana, the direct evidence, is the highest evidence. And Shabda Pramana, or the word of the book, is actually the lowest evidence. And most of them agree on at least three. That is what is called the direct evidence, the inference, and the background knowledge. That is the Shabda Praman. That's only the background knowledge. If it is controverted by direct experience, then it has to change. That's documented very clearly. It's even in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, there's a beautiful shlok in the Bhagavad Gita that actually, sometimes even some of the Sanatani sects do not like. It says, I'll recite the original shloka first and then give you the meaning. It says, Yava anarthe udapane sarvatah samplutodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanatah. That is, a learned man who has experienced the Brahma, or the Brahman as they call it in English sometimes. Somebody who has actually seen it, who has experienced it, he has only as much use for the Vedas as somebody who is sitting on the bank of a huge reservoir has for a small pond. So that is the kind of what is called the vastness of experience on which the Sanatana Dharma actually lays stress on. So what has happened is that intellect is basically limited. If you go by the psychic sciences, in the psychic sciences in the West, uh, if you look at Freud, what Freud and Jung did, they actually borrowed most of their psychology from the East, from more particularly from India, from the yogic experiences. They have brought all of this, and they actually then describe the three states of three psychic states. Young, Carl Jung, he looked at all the four states that are prescribed in the what is called the Vak theory of Rig Veda. We have the four states that is called Para, Pashanti, Madhyama, Vakhari. So Young also looked at them and then said, that, okay, that id, ego, id, superego, and then he called something like a transcendental ego, what is called para. But as the custom was in those times, they consulted the church. And the church struck down the para part, the transcendental, because transcendental meant that you could do direct communication with the highest being, which in case of Sanatana Dharma is Brahma. So direct communication is not permitted. And because direct communication is not permitted, the church struck down the top layer. Similarly, the chakras, because these four states, you have the seven chakras. Out of the seven chakras, he also took out the top two chakras. He recognizes the five, and the top two, he says they are satanic. Where does that term come from? Satanic. Satanic comes straight from religion, comes straight from church. And so that is how what church does is that it adapts itself. And throughout its history, you can see that adaptation. Why it adapts itself? Because the ultimate interest is not uh, giving you heaven or hell, as they promise, the permanent heaven and hell that they promise, the permanent bondage, as I call it. Its main interest is to maintain its power. So, the same Galileo who was persecuted in the 15th century by the church, I think it's 15th century if I'm not getting the date wrong, quietly in 1992, they accept Galileo and his theory as true. I don't know how many people know this. And this they have been doing right through the beginning. In fact, I don't need to bombard people with all kind of talk on this. All they need to do is to go through the history of the ecumenical councils, the councils that started, I think, with 323, the first Nicene Council, and then on to the 6 or 7 councils that they had. And it is, I think, in the fifth council in the year 653, if I'm not mistaken. No, sorry, 553. In 553, where they actually pronounce a curse on the concept of cyclical time. And when they pronounce a curse on this concept of cyclical time, everything changes. Because if the time is cyclical, then you cannot have permanent hell and heaven. It is only when the time becomes linear or super linear, it flows in a straight line, it has becomes finite, that they can pronounce that they can actually become the agent. They become the agency. They can then sell the tickets to heaven, as they do. I think many of these different denominations are actually selling you the tickets to heaven and residences and plots in heaven. That can happen only if the time is not cyclical. As soon as you get the concept of cyclical time, you find that it is not possible for them to hoodwink people with the concept of permanent abode of heaven. In Sanatan Dharma, it simply doesn't happen because the time remains cyclical and it is now attested to by science. And we know that we are now in a multiverse kind of a situation. It's not just one universe. That is something that's always been the experiences that rishis have been saying. So that's where that difference comes in, because it is possible in Sanatan Dharma to be autonomous, to be uh, governed by one's own karma, and not just be autonomous, to establish a direct communion. There is no middleman required. Whereas in the other religions, middleman is a must. You have to have a prophet. Somehow, the God is not powerful enough, or God is not, one should say, confident enough to communicate directly with its own creation. That, I think, is the, uh, what should I say? That is the anomaly, or that is the contradiction that you find in these agency religions.
No, you put it in few words so succinctly and accurately. So when I visited the Vatican sometime back on invitation for Interfaith Council, and there they showed me their museum, and they took me around the museum inside, and I was shocked to see that whomsoever they called as a martyr, they most of them were murdered, majority of them, for some differences with the council which you just mentioned. And uh, and so in many ways, I see that Sanatan Dharma, even though we have many gurus and many peeth are there, many sampradayas are there, but in some ways we are far more better united in many ways. And when so everything that comes out from there, those councils, is kind of mixed up with politico religious, both combined. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah. Well, as I said, church is a political institution. Religion comes only what is called as a side business. Otherwise, if you look at the history of the church, and I think there's so many critics available that say that, and whether it is the original Catholic Church or the number of denominations that have sprung, or the Protestant variety, if you look at what they're doing in India, and what they borrow their funds for. They say that they are going to look after the needy and they are going to look after the poor. But all they do there is to go and fool people and uh, convert and try and convert them. Why is that happening? That is happening because somehow, in order to keep their power intact, they have to keep showing to their funders that the numbers remain intact. If the numbers start going down, then their starts going down. And for that, they resort to all kind of unethical practices and try and indulge in conversion activities in Asian countries. India is also a victim of that. And then they have, using their power, they have created a watchdog body, what is called the United States Commission of International Religious Freedom, which is nothing but giving them cover fire. It's giving cover fire to conversion activities. One. you would be astounded to find that in fact there are no Hindus on that international religious freedom thing. The third largest, more than 1 billion people belonging to the Hindu faith do not even find representation on the so-called United States Commission of International Religious Freedom. That's why, today I made a tweet. I don't know whether you noticed. uh, as soon as, of course, this is the funny thing in Alabama, which they say that, okay, yoga can be done or yoga cannot be done, yoga is banned. And this is the state of the religious freedom in the country, which is actually pronouncing verdicts on everybody else on religious freedom. So I said, I made a tweet. I said the Jaipur Dialogues Commission on International Religious Freedom hereby downgrades United States to BBB minus. So that is the way of saying that, this is showing the hypocrisy of this whole situation. You see, many of the religious oblique spiritual organizations are political. There is no doubt. I wouldn't say that there aren't political organizations among the Sanatan Dharmis either. They will be there. But they cannot go very far because of the very diverse nature of the Sanatan Dharma, where everybody has the right to establish direct contact with the Supreme. When there is no agency required, then their political power will remain limited. And here we have a situation in the West, particularly, where the agency, if you want to reach God, in fact, you cannot reach God. That is not even the object. The object is just to reach heaven. So if you want to reach heaven, you need an agency, and that agency is the church. And the church has appointed its own agents. So necessarily you have to go through them, and then you have to have the what is called that sword of heaven and hell and damnation hanging on your head all the time. It gets much worse in Islam, actually. But since we are talking to a Western audience, let's leave that for the time being. But this is the situation. Church is, all churches, they are purely political institutions. They style themselves as the agencies who will take you to heaven. And heaven is the ultimate object. And what is heaven? Heaven is a permanent bondage. Heaven and hell are both permanent bondages from where there's no escape. Whereas the concept ultimately in all of Sanatan Dharma is that of liberation. You have to get out of your bondages. You get liberated, and you get liberated how? You get liberated by you becoming one with the one supreme. There is one supreme, and everything else is a manifestation of the supreme. But these church people, they will try and mislead people saying that, okay, they have many gods. What the hell, many gods? They have many manifestation of that one supreme. It's not that difficult to understand. And that is something that you have direct evidence of, that you can see in front of yourself. Look at the life forms. All those life forms, those are the manifestation of that same basic substance. You can call it universal consciousness. You can call it God. You can call it Ishwar. You can call it Brahma. Anything you can call it. That is that basic one. And now, of course, we know as we gravitate in physics towards the unified field theory, which may be possible after the E dimension theory that has been perfected by Professor Subhash Kak. I think that 70 years of stagnation in physics might finally come to an end. And at that time, I think it will probably be uh, I should say, a very difficult blow for these political organizations like churches and the uh, your Islamic movement to handle.
you gave a very deep account of everything, and so one thing it comes struck to my mind as soon as you were speaking. A Brahma Bhuvanar Loka Punaravartin Arjuna. Exactly, you said the same thing. Beginning from Brahma Loka, everybody has to come down. Punaravartin Arjuna. He says, Krishna says there. Now, you brought a very good point about USCIRF. I think very few people know that it's a body of US aid which directly works under the US State Department. And you said it very correctly that it is a direct government institution because it is funded by the government, operated by the government, and it pronounces human rights judgments on other people. I would call it a curses because that's the right word to use. That they curse everybody with the human rights.
Now, what does it have to say about Alabama, for instance? I would like to know.
Yeah, it's a, you know, the one thing about, when you talk about difference in democracy in India and the US is, India is a loktantra. Loktantra is a different concept than democracy. So I think very few people understand the loktantra is even mentioned in Mahabharata also, and other texts also is mentioned there. Uh, s- but the basic, most of the Americans do not have the right to question it. It doesn't reach the top. The representative democracy, even if you speak to a congressman, is going to a council and in the foreign relations committee or state home affairs committees, and those committees can do not have to hear anything you say. They can tell you what they say because they're not elected by the people directly. Only the congressmen are elected, but the most of the people are elected and the policies are made in that committee, which nobody knows who is there, who has the influence. Anyone who has the highest money has the influence over there. So in that way, it's very difficult to question anything over there, over here, unless you have a pull over there. They were trying to make me one of the commissioners, but it never happened. uh, my next point is you put it out very correctly, and I think I'm going to read that tweet, and probably I'll ask my team to retweet it immediately. That tweet that you sent out.
Now, why can't other people make their own commissions? There is no monopoly on this. This is a private body. What the hell? And this is a US government body. They can't go on pronouncing judgment on everybody else.
Exactly. I think that's what China, when China does the same thing, then there's a big problem in the US. And but other countries like India, which is the largest democracy, you can say, but when they start pronouncing it, there should be a state body. What do you say on that? Like, can India set up a state body like that?
Of
And,
course,
and
even Sattology can set up one. Jaipur Dialogues can set up one. Anybody can set up one. If one has to go on pronouncing judgments, and everybody can pronounce judgments. And just because US is a powerful entity, maybe it gets itself heard a little more. But then if there are 10 other bodies, they can start countering them. I can ask China to set up one. Why not?
no, they're already doing it. They're already doing it. So, one of the things that struck me when you were talking about the history, one of the things we have seen is that the accusation against India that is a polytheistic, monotheistic, pantheistic, and all these different words they have made up. But if you look at it, it's all to show somebody lower, down, like put somebody down so that they can look better. That has never worked anywhere. Do you think it's going to work for them longer?
I like to ask them uh, who has ordained this great theory that monotheism is better than polytheism. How? What's the evidence? What's the science behind it? Is there any? And
Nothing.
monotheism is what? When they say monotheism, you have a God of the intellect. As simple as that. Because you are an intellectual framework, you cannot go beyond that. And you have to appreciate the difference between monotheism and monism. Monism is one universal consciousness behind all beings, all manifestations, behind what is called animate and inanimate. Jada and Chetan, as it is called in Sanskrit. So all Jada, all Chetan, this is all illuminated by one one spark, and that spark of universal consciousness is common in everyone. That is a far superior philosophy than saying that, okay, we have got one God. That God is created by your intellect. It is not created from experience. And it is that is what I am differentiating between the experiential framework and the intellectual framework. And all this problem that you see in the West today, in the form of these all these theories, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, the what is called the rules for radicals, the woke philosophies, all this is there because of this crisis of a religion which is basically rooted in an intellectual framework. When you have something which is rooted in intellectual framework, it can be countered very easily by rival intellectual frameworks, which can be as stupid or as good as the other framework. And when you actually do away, see, everything that is common to all these theories, the theory of monotheism, the theory of cultural Marxism, postmodernism, the woke theory, the only thing common to all these is that they do not subscribe to direct evidence. All of them work on dogmas. So when it is a question of dogmas, we can always assert that my dogma is better than your dogma.
That's right.
What is the way to find out? Whereas when we are talking about an experiential framework or an empirical framework, because when I say experiential framework, it actually includes the empirical in it. Because direct evidence is of two types. Direct evidence is one of the experiential type, and the other is the empirical type. And that is both admitted in the Sanatan Dharma. That is because there's a few things that you can get through your uh, sensory perceptions, and there are certain things that are beyond sensory perceptions, that are very, very individual, but that individual can actually share it with others and guide others to that same experience, as you would see in something like Bhagavad Gita. What is Krishna telling Arjuna? He is even taking him to that same level of experience that he has. And that that is why the importance of guru in the Indian tradition, because guru is one who can actually take you to the same experience that he has. It is not like the empirical evidence which is available to the senses, but empirical evidence is also there. The Western dogmas, all dogmas, including religion, does not admit of even empirical evidence. In Islam, right now, there are a lot of theoreticians who are actually spending a lot of money and time to prove that Earth is flat, and that the Earth does not move, that it does not go around the sun. And because their proof, their evidence method is their holy book, then they can prove it on that basis. They say that, okay, our prophet is actually resting in this earth, therefore it cannot move. You may show them direct evidence, that is not admissible there. For them, only the word of the Quran and the Hadith is the final word. So you think it is not there, that it's only last 300, 400 years. Go back, you'll find that Christianity was much worse. I gave you the example of Galileo. The poor fellow was persecuted, and then quietly now in 1992 they have admitted that, okay, they have recognized Galileo. What is this? And they haven't publicized it also, no?
No,
Most people do not know that Galileo is now, what is called, Galileo is now acceptable.
no, they change with the times and the colors. One recent phenomena I saw, in it's a very positive way, and you mentioned about Alabama. There are many states which have passed the rules, legislations against yoga in schools, and where they said yoga is a Hindu philosophy. And so when the United Nations accepted 21st June as an International Yoga Day because of Prime Minister Modi, there were severe opposition within the church councils, multiple. So like they're not just one church. Catholic is one. Catholics are Christians and Catholics have a lot of difference of opinion. They're not the same.
I know evangelicals and Christians, Catholics, and okay.
And the many of the evangelicals, the big ones from Houston, like Joel Osteen and other things, they are pretty much, they steal that words from Bhagavad Gita and present it as their own Bible. That's what is happening there. Look, if you see their sermons or anywhere, they have 60,000 people on every Saturday. 60,000 in Houston. They have purchased the whole stadium, and the most of the talks, they look to you. If you remove the name of the person, just listen to the words, it will look like somebody's teaching Bhagavad Gita to you. So and that appeals to their own followers, which is a huge business for them.
How long can they keep them hidden? Ultimately, if they are educated people, actually, education has been the greatest curse for these dogmatic religions. Whereas education has greatly improved the outlook towards Sanatan Dharma,
Exactly.
education has been a great curse for the dogmatic religions. That is the situation.
Yeah,
And of course, what you're saying, we have this experience in India. Last 200 years, this is exactly what the church was doing here. They created all kind of fault lines. They created all kind of false theories. The theories of caste they built up, the theory of Aryan invasion they built up, the theory of sati they built up, and all of them now, as we research, we are finding that all of them are made up theories. In fact, I have a challenge. Your people are here. So many university students are here. You can take up this challenge. And my challenge is that you proved the Aryan invasion theory scientifically, and I'll give you a prize purse of rupees 2.1 crore. That's I would say that about a quarter of a million rupees, a quarter of $1 million.
correct.
That's a quarter of $1 million is not a bad sum. I even offered it to people like Michael Witzel and Audrey Truschke and all these Hindu-hating characters. But they are only interested in propaganda. They cannot prove anything. Similarly, even for caste, announced a prize, 6 lakh rupees. That will be, I think, not very much as far in dollar terms, but nobody is able to prove. As I that you show one Indian scriptures which suppose what is called birth-based varna. There's none. It's nothing, absolutely nothing. But then propaganda, backed up by a powerful state, backed up by a powerful church, backed up by powerful evangelicals, that sells. It sells in the same manner as the woke theory is selling these days in the United States.
Faith is being used by the US government to control other governments. Like one of the philosophies was to export democracy. I always say one of the biggest exports of the Americans is the democracy, because that's how they control the other countries. And wherever they cannot control, they put the dictators. In fact, America works best with the dictators all over the world.
Yes, yes, all over the world,
And
absolutely.
they want somebody to be in power, because US presidential system is almost like that, because there's a one man show at the top. and somehow that's how the US is put together and works together. Now, one question being asked, like we have so many of our students who are may be belonging to many other faiths, but now they practice Sanatan Dharma, many of them. Now they they also want to see that kind of support from the Indian government, because India is the home of Sanatan Dharma. Do you think that is ever possible, or do you think it's being working towards that direction? This is a question by the audience, by the way.
Mm. No, can you just repeat? I just
So is
lost
it,
that in the last part.
yeah, is it possible, just the way the US government supports the export of the Christian ideology publicly in the name of USCIRF? USCIRF is a branch to spread Christianity. Now we all know that. Is there anything can Indian government set up to help Sanatan followers all over the world? Some structure?
Uh, I doubt it, because the Indian government is very, very apologetic about its Sanatan roots. And because of that, the stupid word called secularism put into the constitution in 1976. And that also limits its options. And of course, the way secularism works in India, its actual meaning in practice is anti Hindu. So even a Hindu, if he prides himself being a Hindu, then he would not be considered secular. But a Muslim or a Christian is automatically secular. So that is the kind of distortion that is crept into the Indian definition of secularism, and that makes it very defensive about these things. But certainly, we can have private endeavors.
I think you and I should
Set up,
collaborate and
we can
in
set up for private endeavors. And of course, the one thing that Indians have, especially in the United States, is money. So they can support it.
no, one thing I would like to collaborate with you, petitioning Indian government, because when there is a
I have already set up one thing. That is, I have set up uh, with Mr. Vibhuti Jha. I have set up, and I will very soon I will come out with the details. And that I have set up rating services for the academic campuses, and I'm going to rate them on their what is called Hindu friendliness. That is the term. So we'll rate their Hindu friendliness on a parameter of 0 to 100.
no,
So if we can do something like this, a Hindu friendliness rating, then we can do a religious freedom or a religious hypocrisy rating as well.
true. No, one last question, and again coming from the audience, is that you so around 40 to 50 million Americans. Now, Pew Research will never give you such data, because Pew Research is again a US government influenced body, not a run body, influenced body. Pew Research, people all over the world trust it, but the most of the data they hide. Like for example, when they count Hindus in America, they will count under agnostics or people who have no faith. But these are the people who are actually believe in yoga or the scientific way earth is round, and they believe in science more, and they naturally fall for yoga meditation. Like I live in a neighborhood, I live in San Diego, and from San Diego to LA and a little bit all on the coast side, one of the wealthiest Americans live here in this area, and people who earn their wealth in New York but settle here. That's how it is. So they live here, but their money is coming from New York. So majority of people you'll find Ganesh, Shiva, Buddha all over their houses, and actually these are the people who are considered agnostic, like they have no faith. They are the ones who have lost their faith, and and that is the thing here, which is, so when you count all those numbers from Pew Research and other things, I made a rough calculation, and I said there are 800,000 yoga teachers in America, 800,000. And if you roughly calculate that they teach 100 students a month, so you can just imagine what numbers we're talking about. And then you also say maybe somebody did yoga once in a month, once a week, once in 2 months, or attended classes on yoga and meditation. Now it comes out to be 40 to 50 million Americans who have touched yoga at some point of time or other or not, including big Christian leaders and their wives. Big Joel Austin's wife, I know for sure, they go to yoga classes. They won't say it in public, because if they say it, they lose their church following, because what they teach is different than what they're actually practicing. So now with this kind of thing being going, and as India as a sovereign country can say that this is the culture that it's our culture, is yoga is our practices, don't you think it can influence a big time in America, bringing a recognition to the Sanatan Dharma faith?
Well, as far as yoga is concerned, I think both the Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well as the Indian state is quite unapologetic about it. Uh, so that is one thing. In fact, it was his effort that started the International Day of Yoga. And I think it was passed, that resolution was passed probably with the highest number in favor ever. I think it was 177 to nil. Maybe Pakistan must have abstained. But even Saudi Arabia and such Islamic countries also supported, and all the Christian countries they supported. So yoga as a product is, again, as I say, it's a cool product, and that can be a very good way of uh, taking Sanatan Dharma forward. The only one thing that I think we also make this mistake, that we sometimes we say that yoga is all about your physical well-being. No, it isn't. The Ashtanga Yoga, the first four are just preparatory. When we talk about yoga and we say that, okay, it is yam, niyam, asana, pranayam, then after that, these are preparations. And the real thing is what we call pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Uh, what exactly it is actually described in my first book, Krishna Gopeshwar, where I actually look at each of these states in the life of Radha and Krishna. And so that is also something that we need to be unapologetic about. And very often I find even these yoga teachers, they try and they become defensive, and they say, no, no, this is just about physical well-being. No, it isn't just about physical well-being. Yoga is the technology of it is the what is called uh, one of the four ways of uniting with the supreme, because the ultimate goal, the liberation, happens when you recognize, you do come to that self realization, that you find out that you are the supreme yourself, and yoga is the technology that leads you to that. And it is a scientific technology in the sense, because everything is all described. Okay, you go this way, this way, this way, this way. It is actually leading you to that. That is why it is also called Raja Yoga. Because through these actions you reach that state. So we need to make it clear that yes, it is actually the technology of uniting the Jivatma with the Paramatma. Anybody has any issues with that, then you say that, okay, you just want to do the four part, then you can call it Hatha Yoga or something.
You put it so well, and I think we have so many intelligent people in the conference today, and most of them have not left because they value every word that you're saying. And many of them are professors in big, like one of them is a dean of a college, and they teach yoga in their private life. And we have also Dr. Francis Clooney, welcome. You also joined. He's the dean of the Hindu Studies Department of Harvard.
Hello.
And one of the questions I have to him is, that he's a practicing pastor, but he's a regular on our Sattology shows for so many months. So, Professor, welcome. And so I heard you. You heard the whole conversation. So we want more freedom in Howard now. So,
I am going to rate Harvard also on Hindu friendliness. Right now, it's whatever preliminary work I have done, it's got only 22 marks out of 100. It's failed.
all right. And I think Sanjay ji, we would like to collaborate with you because we have a Sattology index of religious freedom coming out, which will we want to share with you our findings. The students are making that list, and this is one for last 1 year we are doing, but somehow we have not come at the entire framework, which you must have already made. Now, my last point before we end the talk and we get on to the one last question we have is when you look at the global political dynamics today, and you have spoken a lot on international affairs, you speak on it. What is the position or the future of Indo-US relations on a very solid framework? I'm saying not on a just trade basis, because America understands only trade, and Indians don't understand just trade. They want to, they talk about relations, they also want freedom to practice their faith and culture and bring it into US in a big way. So what is your view on the entire dynamics?
Well, at a very superficial level, the political level, I think I can say that the chances of India and US collaborating are very high. But I also alluded to the fact that the United States, because of the intellectual framework of the religions that it has practiced, it has got into the other dogmas, and those dogmas are destructive because whatever may be the other demerits of a dogmatic religion, uh, it certainly teaches you certain values, and it at least keeps the families together, and it gives you the heft to actually progress even materially. In fact, one of the reasons that the Protestant doctrine succeeded was that entire that concept of calling and concept of uh, reward in this life. That is something that Islam hasn't yet taken up, and that is because they're so obsessed with afterlife all the time. So that was definitely a major progress that Protestantism made, and because of that, the capitalist doctrine came into being, and the capitalist doctrine succeeded. The Renaissance happened, and all those things happened. But uh, because it did not change the methods of evidence, the other dogmas, as I mentioned, the cultural Marxism, postmodernism, and right now you have the woke philosophy, which is nothing but another kind of fascism. They seem to be taking over the US campuses in a very big way. And that is something that is completely inimical to any healthy relationship uh, with anyone for that matter, not just India. So I am actually a bit worried about that, and I'm looking at solutions. And one of the solutions that I have looked at is the Sanatan philosophy, that all inclusive, the experiential inclusive framework that Sanatan offers. The intellectual framework, it's very easy to become exclusive, and that is why you see a proliferation of so many exclusive theories these days. Again, I would say there's time to move beyond the intellect. Until you move beyond the intellect and go for higher experiences, the crises will remain. And though we still have somewhat of an open architecture, the evidence of that is your talk, that so many people from diverse backgrounds, even diverse religious backgrounds, are all listening to this talk. That definitely gives me hope. But then the current climate in the US is very badly vitiated. And I keep having a talk on that on Jaipur Dialogues almost every second or third week as to where it is taking the United States.
Thank you so much, Sanjay ji. There's so much to talk to, and I would like to invite you again, and given your time, and then we'll discuss more some other topics. But thank you for sharing today these points. And for viewers, I've asked most of your questions, and so if you want to see the recording, will be available on YouTube very shortly. And if till then, namaskar and thank you for joining the show. And thank
Thank
you, Sanjay.
you and namaskar to everybody.